I'm no longer on the camera. That's the important part.
Okay, Mark, you wanna?
Yes, ma'am. So, like I was stating, we had met in regards to this cannabis ordinance for quite some time now, different work sessions, different workshops. Most recently, we discussed this our last commission meeting last Thursday. That's when it was brought to my attention. Well, prior to that, it was brought to my attention by Vicky that we may need to look at this specifically HC, which states that it pretty much outlawed, didn't allow for anything when it came to cannabis. So with that being said, Vicky and I and Angelica had attended some of the municipal league workshops in regards to cannabis. I think things were explained very well there. So at that point, we had the opportunity, different municipalities, to be able to submit our current ordinances to the municipal league, to give them a chance to kind of review it and give us some pointers and some ideas on that. With that being said, now you have the most current marked up version, which I think fits the best for the city. There's been some changes in some of the verbiage, as well as trying to minimize liability from any lawsuits that would come forward. So with that being said, I'd like, Vicky, if you have any other further comments. If not, then I'd like to turn it over to Jared. He's joining us today through our go-to meeting app to be able to give some of the ideas. He was the individual that reviewed this and gave some comments and suggestions. Again, at the end of the day, we understand ultimately the city commission has final say-so on how we move forward with this, but I did want to give him a chance to explain why he made some of his comments and markups and striking some of the language. Again, just in my opinion, because it's the best interest of the city to make sure we minimize any liability for lawsuits.
Let's go ahead and let Jared
Okay,
make his comments, and then we can discuss later.
Jared.
All right, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jared Najar. I'm an attorney in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I represent the Municipal League. I've been doing some work for them with cannabis ordinances around the state, so hopefully you'll find this helpful. But what was just mentioned is correct. My goal here is to prevent you all from getting sued, and hopefully that will be the case. There are groups out there that are just waiting to file lawsuits. So I tried to stick as closely to the Cannabis Regulation Act and the current CCD regulations as possible, keeping in mind that ultimately the decision is yours. So hopefully I can answer any questions you may have this afternoon. No need to walk through it line by line, but really if there's any questions that you all have, I'd be happy to do my best to give you the correct answers.
I think we got time. I think we can, I don't care if we go line by line, but I do care where there was corrections done so it can be adequate so that we can understand it correctly.
Okay.
Or where you modified it. The other part we already know pretty much because we were part of it in drafting it,
Okay. Well, let me see. I'm going to make sure I have the latest version on my screen here. Okay, so if you're looking at page 1, just in the whereas, that first whereas clause, I just deleted some language there just to not expand anything from the Cannabis Regulation Act and keep it as consistent as possible with the language in the act itself.
So actually you deleted things that are red, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, let me see. I deleted.
I just want
The
a point
state.
of clarification.
Yes, the statement I deleted was, or the phrase, was which are authorized to engage in medicinal sale, retail sale, cultivation, and manufacturing of cannabis. Those aren't the only things authorized by the Cannabis Regulation Act. And quite frankly, whereas clauses, in my opinion, are unnecessary oftentimes just because they don't really carry the effect of law. So that part is not really important, but just to go through it, just if you're looking at it on your screen. Moving on to the definition of cannabis extract on page 2, I just included language. Let's see. Okay, the Cannabis Control Division of RLD. So that's the state licensing division that governs the cannabis
Okay,
industry.
Page 3, it's page 3.
Page 3 on ours.
Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead.
That's another minor one. Let's see, moving on. All right, in section 4, on my screen it's page 4. Let's see,
It
your
is.
public property restrictions. So I deleted the phrase on property that is occupied, owned, controlled, or operated by the city. The reason for that, and I explained it there in the comments, but these types of restrictions could potentially subject the city to unconstitutional grounds, and in particular, the Equal Protection Clause. Oftentimes, there are groups out there that, especially under the new Civil Rights Act, which really opens up potential lawsuits to anyone can sue for basically any reason. But if there's a group that's being treated, and I'm air quoting here, unequally in any way, you could potentially be subjected to a lawsuit. So if you allow one business to operate on property that's occupied, owned, controlled, or operated by the city, but not a cannabis business, you will likely be sued.
Well,
You might have your own reasons for that, and I completely understand that, but I assume there are liquor businesses operating, or other adult type of businesses or entertainment, things like that. Those are the ones that I typically try and correlate to cannabis. Just if you treat one differently than the others, you could potentially be sued.
well, we own a liquor license in a convention center. And that's property
Right.
of the community.
And that could give someone ammunition to file a lawsuit, particularly under either the Equal Protection Clause or the new Civil Rights Act.
Let me ask you a
So that was
question.
my,
Let me ask you a question. Is it the federal law that says you cannot have it in public places like parks and stuff like that? Or is it the state law? I can't remember which one it is. I know
So
federal law
state
is still
law-
outlaw. Yeah.
the state law did define public areas, and I included that here, I believe somewhere. I'm looking for it right now. Well, I can't find it right now. There is a definition in the Cannabis Regulation Act, which is very specific. Okay, it's in BB, public place. So public place means a place to which the general public has access and includes hallways, lobbies, and other parts of apartment houses and hotels that do not constitute rooms or apartments designed for actual residents, highways, streets, schools, places of amusement, parks, playgrounds, and places used in connection with public passenger transportation. So that is already in state law, and we have it here as well.
Okay.
But I didn't want to deviate from the language really at all, because I think that covers what you're hoping to accomplish. But if we deviate, then it opens up, the potential for someone to file a civil rights lawsuit. And then, let's see. I also deleted, so under that same section 4, it is unlawful for an individual to smoke cannabis or consume cannabis products in any designated open space in the city. Again, same reasons there, and the same intent. Public place is already defined in both the Cannabis Regulation Act and above in definition BB of this ordinance. So I think what you're hoping to accomplish, I think, is accomplished the way we have it phrased here.
Mhm.
Or just avoid deviating too much from the actual Cannabis Regulation Act.
Okay.
Moving on to the next page.
I think of this one, we're gonna make sure our law enforcers really understand it. I think it's a little confusing, and I think they're gonna have to really be clarified so they wouldn't be so,
Right.
so they understand.
And it might be a good idea to have really a yearly training, because I think this is an area of law that's going to be constantly evolving, particularly in the beginning.
It is.
So it's a good idea just to have law enforcement sit down once a year or even twice a year and just kind of go through things.
Actually, I think we have to go over it because there's a lot of misconception, especially from the public, on the legalization of being able to utilize marijuana. They think it's the same thing like smoking a cigarette down the street, you know?
Right. No, I agree. There's a lot of unknowns out there.
And
And
actually,
I
law
think
enforcement
they
thinks
could be.
that it's illegal but it is, it still needs to be clarified so they understand. Okay, thank you.
Right. So I added a comment, what's page 5 for me? It's section 5, 5A2 subset D, just with respect to fire and safety requirements. I assume you do, but I didn't know if there is a specific ordinance already addressing those things, because it requires compliance with that. If so, I wanted to include that in this ordinance, just to clarify things, and if not,
Okay.
it's important.
Okay, you
Just
lost
kinda
me.
talk.
So what were you talking about, page 5? Is that,
Page 5,
Up at the top.
at least on
Where
my
it says
screen, it's page
Fire and
5.
life safety.
It's under section 5A2D. D is a dog.
the wrong page.
Compliance with existing fire and safety requirements.
Page 5.
I got page 5.
Okay, it's right up here.
It's the first red
Right up
line
here.
on top.
Oh, okay. But no, I was looking for what he was saying, the A,
Yeah.
but I don't have the A.
Yeah, it goes on down, yeah.
It says here complying with the existing fire or what?
That's the one, yeah. So with respect to fire and life safety requirements, I just wanted to know if that's something you have in an ordinance somewhere, those requirements, because I want to make sure that that's not vaguely stated and instead someone would know what that means.
We do, but it needs to be updated.
Well, you also have it on the state fire marshal, when they inspect the building, you know, they have those. But
Right.
on the state level, it is there. We even say here that we need to utilize, the city needs to update it, but it's already on the state fire marshal code, on a building.
Right.
Safety.
I was just reading that like a prospective applicant, and anything that could potentially be viewed as vague, we want to try and be as specific as possible, just so nobody comes in and says, well, I complied with everything, you know, A, B, and C, and have the city come in and say, well, yeah, you didn't comply with D, and have them say, well, I didn't think that was something I needed to comply with. It was a vague statute, and therefore I'm going to file a lawsuit, you know. So
And
this
actually,
is a relatively minor thing. I'm just trying to think of any possible situation that could subject the city to a lawsuit.
Actually, we do need to update it because we don't have anybody in the local level, which is our fire marshal, anybody that does any of these safety inspections anymore.
We have it in the fire for the fire chief to do it,
But he doesn't,
but he doesn't.
and nobody does.
No.
Because I know we don't have it. And I know a lot of people have to call the state fire marshal.
Mhm.
And the state fire marshal is always saying, well, it's really not my job, but I'll go ahead and do it.
Right.
So I guess
And
I don't know
what I
to do.
read in the CCD rules and regulations for producer applicants, so for people who are growing cannabis, they're going to have that compliance. They're going to have an inspector come and actually look at the building they're in and say, yep, you're up to code or not, just as part of their application process. So that's something in mind.
Okay.
Let me see what else we have here. So there was just some minor, just grammatical type of changes there. Nothing important really to discuss, nothing substantive. Section 6.
Hey Jared, could we go back to that real quick? I know it's been a hot topic for the commission wanting to further limit, I guess, the density of the business by allowing a cannabis establishment only every 150 feet.
Right. I remember speaking about this with Vicky, and that's something that I've seen around the state. It's not a unique concern there. My only concern, just trying to be as conservative as possible in avoiding any lawsuits. You can regulate the density, but if there's room for a potential cannabis company to say, well, there's a bar every 100 feet in this area, and they're not prohibiting liquor establishments, but I can't operate a family business, as a cannabis producer, and now I can't provide for my family, and I'm going to sue you. I don't know if that's the case, but there are some municipalities around the state who have tried to do that restriction for cannabis, but they don't have any types of restrictions for liquor establishments or other adult type businesses. So that's something for you all to consider. Can you do it? It's really unclear. Nobody's been sued yet. So we're really kind of waiting to see what would uphold, what types of ordinances would be upheld in court. To be ultra conservative, I've been typically advising municipalities not to impose further restrictions other than just the 300 feet from a school or daycare center. Just because that's what's defined in statute currently. I imagine the legislature will further refine that, possibly even this coming session, but certainly in future years, because it is bringing about a lot of questions. But it's a choice that's ultimately yours. My advice is to stick with the Cannabis Regulation Act as closely as possible currently, in the beginning, and then just kind of see the changes. But that's really up to you.
Well, actually, it's up to the commission what they feel about it. Do you want it to go with what's regulated by the state, or do you want to impose the 150 feet? 150 feet means almost it's either one per block practically because of the location of the building, because most blocks are 300 feet across or more, but it depends what the location is. It's up to the commission how they feel about it. If they don't want to congregate them all together,
Right.
But to be honest with you, I think the only reason we did that is because we don't want it to become like Skid Row Street.
Right.
Everything is
I hear
concentrated
you.
in one area, and now we don't have anything else. I mean, the rest of the part that's eligible is empty, And this
Right.
kind of spread it and equalize it more out. To be honest with you, most of our liquor license very limited in this community. So actually, most of them were sold and taken to Albuquerque. I think we have very limited, other than the beer and wine license that we have now for restaurants, But I think most of them are pretty much 150 feet apart from every serving facility.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, that's something to consider. It's not specifically outlawed. It's not like the Cannabis Regulation Act says you can't do that. You can regulate the time, place, and manner. What a court would interpret that to mean is currently up in the air. We don't really know.
Yeah.
And we also don't know from a practical standpoint if you'd even have someone who wanted to sue. Have you had a lot of interest from residents currently in starting these types of businesses?
No, we have a lot of interest, people wanting to start business, but not protesting it.
Okay. Yeah, that's always something that just because you can have a problem doesn't mean you will.
Yeah, that's correct.
I just want to
I don't know.
provide the broadest advice possible so
Yeah,
what could happen. Doesn't mean it will, though.
yeah, and we really want to get this ordinance done, you know what I mean? So actually, what we really want to be able to do is either decide whether they want the 150 or not 150, because actually in reality, we've been working, in January the 1st is, one of the stages of the cannabis from the state begins, and then everything has to be ready for April the 1st, and you have people already investing money in that situation, So,
Right. It's from what I hear, very.
I don't know, it's up to the commission, but to be honest with you, I do want this ordinance in so that we can just move forward.
Right.
I don't want people investing and then feeling that we change the rules.
Right.
It's not right, it's not fair for those who have invested their hard dollars.
Right.
To me,
Well,
it doesn't matter, but I can understand where the people will come from, the residents of this town, where they don't want like a roll of just nothing but cannabis and yet dispensaries, and yet everybody's in the same block. And,
Right.
so I don't know.
Well, for what it's worth, and just with those thoughts in mind, my advice to get it up and running as soon as possible and without issue,
Mhm.
I would advise that you stick as closely to the Cannabis Regulation Act as possible and have that 300 feet from a school or daycare center.
Oh, no,
But,
we're
you
leaving
know,
that. That's not the question. The question is 150 feet from each dispensary. I mean, we're not,
Right.
we can't do that. We can't do nothing about that. That's state law.
Right.
Regulations. in
My
there.
advice would be to not impose that additional 150 feet. That's typically what I've been telling people, and some have been over 150 feet, but my advice is just to stick with what's currently in the Cannabis Regulation Act. So 300 feet from a school or daycare center, not, 150 feet between existing businesses, just to be safe.
That's up to the commission. To me, it doesn't matter. I really don't care.
Right.
But I'd like to get this ordinance as soon as possible, finished, because we got people that are really coming in and wanting to do something with it.
Right.
I don't know. Up to you guys.
So Jared, I think this is a perfect time to ask, what's the best legal route to go here? Is it to repeal and replace with the new ordinance, or is it easy? I know it's still the same time process. Or do we go the route where we just amend the current ordinance? What would be more legit?
Yeah, just amend the current ordinance, since you already have one on file.
Yeah, that's
And really, these changes are not well, they are pretty substantive. So,
that's one of the things that I like to see, just amend, not go through another ordinance. I'm through with that. We just amend what we
Right.
already have, because we are covering a whole bunch of the ordinance, a lot more of the ordinance than we're eliminating.
But it's still the same process either way. I mean, it's just verbiage repealing versus amending. You still have to go through the public hearing, through the advertisement process and whatnot, correct?
But we're amending it, so actually the date that we pass the ordinance is the effective date of that ordinance, except for the amendment on it. And that's
Did we
what
get
I wanted to
clarification
say.
from the attorney on what he was gonna say?
yeah, so I was just responding to whether or not the public hearing process would be required. Yes, it would. I'd still advise amending.
Yeah.
Rather than replacing, but you'll still have to provide an opportunity for the public to comment, because these amendments are substantive. As you mentioned in the beginning, Section 8 basically said, you can't operate a cannabis business here, and I took that one out, and we'll get there in a moment. But, so it is, very substantive changes are being made, but I think you can still amend.
But actually, what we amend, actually, the public hearing is commenting on the amended part of the ordinance. And the original ordinance that we already put in place is not the area that will be the public comment on.
Right. Yeah,
And that's
just on the
why,
amendment.
that's why I wanted to see it more of an amendment, because it's already an established ordinance, we're just amending it now.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. So Section 6, I had some revisions there. Trying to see what I deleted and what went in. My screen is kind of strange here.
You struck through dispensaries where it talks about the specific locations. C1 and C2 commercial zones for dispensaries. Instead of that, you struck that, put cannabis retail establishments, which in my opinion fits a lot better with the actual definitions.
Restricted to property.
Exactly. I put that just because that's how the Cannabis Regulation Act defines it. Dispensary is what we all know it as and what people call it, but cannabis retail establishment is just more consistent with the language in the state statute at least. Let's see, I had a note in there as well. So with regard to subsection B there, so 6B, the ordinance had existing school, preschool, daycare, trade school, higher education facility. I think that should be fine because they're all schools. But it does expand slightly on the vague language that's contained in the Cannabis Regulation Act. I think it's fine as is. I wouldn't necessarily change it. The only one that would potentially be concerning would be the trade school and the higher education facility, just because those are typically adults that attend those types of things. But I don't think you'll have an issue there. They are schools. The Cannabis Regulation Act says school, so you're not deviating necessarily from the language there. I just wanted you all to be able to discuss that on your own and kind of decide where you wanted to go in that regard.
Okay, we do have one that came before the commission that is next door to what we call our vocational school, which is higher education. That's the person that came before us on that old grocery store that they're looking at.
Okay.
Kawau West, and then next door, you have the Alco building, which belongs to the vocational school. So,
Right.
we need to work on that and address that in ourselves, because are we gonna allow it? Because the gentleman seemed to be pretty much wanting to invest in that property.
Right.
And if we keep the trade school or the higher education, he will not be able to develop that property that it's being kind of dilapidated for a period of time.
But wouldn't he be able to take that in front of planning and zoning and ask for a variance? And something though, also, not all that property belongs to the school.
But it's
Only the building.
only the building, but it's still within the hundred,
150.
but the whole deal is, but the whole deal, even if he takes the planning development, they still have to come to the city for the final say so. So if we want, I mean, that's gonna be an issue because it seems like the gentleman really wants to invest in that property. And it's great to see a dilapidated property be brought up for some use. So I don't know how the commission will feel about it, but I'm okay with higher trade school, with trade schools, which is a vocational school, and higher education being out of that part. And the only reason I say that is because, hey, let's get real. I got a lot of people that do have medical cannabis that attend all those facilities. I mean, I'm not thinking high school, I'm talking trade school and higher education.
So I did have a comment, Commissioner Moy, in regards to the variance process.
Mhm.
It's the same process as it would be for all our other planning and zoning variance applications. And our planning and zoning commission is a decision-making body when it comes to variances, so it would never technically come up to city commission. That would be handled through the planning and zoning commission.
Oh, yeah, but we can attack it and get it out of the way and not have to go through it either. You know, that's an interesting subject that you guys can decide whether we wanted to address or not address.
There is a point also that I'd like to make,
Mhm.
is that, although, as Attorney Najjar pointed out, trade school, higher education are usually, attended by adults. We do have a program at the high school where the high school kids do attend, college,
Mesa Land.
Mesa Lands.
Do they actually physically go there?
Yes.
Because I know that the ones in Clayton and all that do it by
No.
by whatever you call it. It's part of their high school curriculum.
Correct. It is a dual credit.
Yeah,
And they
and
leave
so
the high school and they walk over to the college and they attend. the
here they
college
do
class.
on campus, other ones
Yes.
don't. I
So
know.
that's one thing I wanted to bring to your all's attention, is that there are students underage that do attend Mesa Lands.
And if that was gonna be a bar, would they have to go through a variance to make that a bar?
No, because Six Shooters was there, remember?
But Six
The
Shooters was
Six
there
Shooters
before
was
the
there
school was.
before the college was.
Right.
But a patio wasn't there because I remember when we started our community college, El Patio was there.
Right, so if it was established before, then it's not an issue.
Mhm.
The bar was established before the college came, so it wasn't an issue. It's only if the bar wants to come in after the school's been built.
And I believe it was further than 300 feet because they only had the main campus, building A there, and then everything was expanded with Alco building and whatnot after the fact as well.
Okay.
Well, I'm just speaking of that specific location, you don't think that'd be 300 feet away from the Alco building? Or you're looking for one side of the block all the way
Yeah,
around?
that's what I was wondering, if the building, because, I know when they were talking about the Racino, the guy that actually owns the property only gave the building to the college, not all the property, because he had talked about coming in and doing a strip mall if we got the Racino.
Yeah.
So I'm not a measuring type person, but I didn't know if that from that building to Alco was 300 feet or not.
From the lowest point.
It's
From
property
Alco
line to
prop-
property
They go by
line.
the property line. They go by the property line. And the property line to the Piggly Wigglies or whatever, the Powwow West, is less than 300 feet. Because you're looking at blocks. And,
I'd assume so, as it extends to the north.
and you go all the way to the alley.
Closest point.
I didn't.
So I don't
Can't tell
know if
them.
you really want to be friendly about it. I don't know, if you want to scratch that out or not. That's up to you guys.
What is the foot requirement in the CRA? Is it 300?
300. To me, I know we have some children going to the vocational school, but they're going to the main campus. They're not going to the Alco building right now.
But regardless, it still fall under the trade school or higher education since it's owned by.
No, that's
Well,
why,
with it being owned by the foundation, not the college itself, would that still be considered part of higher education?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just something that I thought of.
the trade school and higher education would be anything above 12th grade. And trade school would be vocational school, skill training. Higher education would be anything above the high school. So I don't know, it's up to the commission what they decide to do, because you do have, and the only reason I bring it up is because you already have some people that are really wanting to invest in a building that has been an eyesore for a long period of time. I think a car attacked it one time or something. And it has a hole in it too. And it sounds like this person does have the money.
Which building is that?
At Powwow West,
Oh, okay.
next to the six shooter.
Yeah, I used to live there.
Yeah.
When we first moved to
Yeah,
Tewksbury.
so that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
So those are the things that, I mean, we really, if we really wanted to do, I mean, this guy owns the property. I don't even know his name, but he was here. He came before the commission.
He doesn't own it, he's looking at buying it.
He was the attorney representing.
No, the attorney, no, the guy was with him. The guy was with him.
Yeah, but he didn't.
But he didn't get up and talk.
No, but he was here with
Yeah.
the owner of the
The guy
property.
that's
was here.
working as a consultant.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Jared, so that brings up an interesting topic when the individual they're referencing, the attorney got up to speak. Per our current ordinance, section 6, letter A, subsection A, and the C1 and C2 commercial zones, when it talks about just cannabis retail establishments, that's when the individual asked if they'd be able to have some kind of grow within that same property as well. And at that point, that's when the commission decided that all growing or cannabis producing would all take place in A1, which is agricultural zones. Are we setting ourselves up for issues there as well?
No, if you're treating a cannabis producer just like any other agricultural producer, I think you're okay. You certainly have a justified reason in wanting to keep cannabis in an agricultural zone. You can just say, we're treating it like all other agriculture. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's cannabis. It's just, we don't allow an alfalfa grow in the middle of the city, so we're not gonna allow a cannabis grow here. That being said, they do offer integrated licenses at the state level. So a company can come and say, I want to be a producer and a retailer. They can do that. I guess they could still operate under the same license, but be restricted for their grow in an agricultural zone, whereas they can operate a retail establishment in a commercial zone. So I think you'd be okay proceeding that way for those reasons, because based on what you're saying, you're not treating cannabis producer differently than you treat any other agricultural business out there.
So what about an indoor grow? Or like the greenhouses, what would we?
Indoor.
Right. Yeah, they do have indoor grows. There are some municipalities that are allowing them in commercial zones. I think that's probably more common than not from what I've seen. So it really is up to you. I mean,
And
that's
actually,
a question for y'all.
and actually, for the agriculture outdoor growing, we have put it where it was, even though it's residential, but if they had been utilizing it for agriculture, if they're grandfathered in to grow on a part.
Right.
A, B, I mean, 6, under A, B, you know what I'm saying? And it does say there that it's being utilized for the purpose of agriculture, then they can do an outside grow if they choose to. If they don't choose to, they can actually do the indoor growing, but it still gives that opening there. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question there. Would you mind repeating that again?
Actually, if you look at section C, under A,
Uh-huh.
B, okay? It says existing industrial and residential resident zone utilizing land for agriculture purpose, be grandfathered in to allow for the growth consistent with the state statute and state regulation.
Right.
Okay.
So,
Because we have,
Yeah.
we have one farmer alone that has 70 acres under a subdivision that's considered, all lots 50 by 150, and he utilizes it 100% for agriculture, from alfalfa to wheat growing or whatever, and that's what we wanted to cover, because the city is pretty big in having people that had zoning areas that's still under agriculture production.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that should be okay. My only slight concern with regard to grandfathering someone in is unless you're grandfathering in a medical cannabis producer, it could potentially pose a problem if there's someone growing alfalfa who's being now grandfathered in to grow cannabis, if that's not something that you
Well,
did initially.
Actually, cannabis is also under the medical, it's the same plan, you know what I mean? So actually, they would be grandfathered in. It's not gonna be a differentiation between those two. It's the same plan. One's utilized for, you have to have a license to do, and to do medical, and the other license you have,
Right.
I mean, you can possess a medical cannabis license and a recreational license, but you can't have a recreational and try and get a medical, because those are very limited.
Right, I think there's 35 medical or 36 medical in the state.
And that's
Are
it.
there any producers currently in the city of Tucumcari?
No, none.
Okay, then that's not something you necessarily need to worry about.
So actually, that zoning, and like, this is what the deal is, because, and this is why we decided to go with this, because this farmer, I'm just using one example, decided that he doesn't want to grow medical cannabis, but he wants to utilize maybe half of the acreage that he has into developing into a trailer lot or park or whatever, and the other part for cannabis, because
Okay.
that way he never takes it out of what we call zoning, A1 zoning or B zoning that it is considered to be under.
Okay, yeah, nothing in that language contradicts state law, so I don't see a reason why, at least under the Cannabis Regulation Act, why you wouldn't be able to do it that way.
Okay, good.
So a minute ago, did I hear you correctly when you said that growing could be put into C1 and C2 commercial zones?
Yeah, it really just depends on what you prefer. I've seen it in commercial or agricultural. That's how it's drafted sometimes to account for indoor grows, where somebody might say, well, here's a nice warehouse that I'd like to rent out and have an indoor cannabis grow, but it's in this commercial zone. So that's something that is permissible in other municipalities, doesn't mean that you all have to. One other thing, just with regard to manufacturing as well, because I noticed that's in the agricultural zone.
Mhm.
From what I understand, manufacturing is basically the process of extracting the THC from the cannabis flower. So it isn't necessarily something that an agricultural business would be doing. It's more of like a chemist So that might be one you want to move into commercial zones. That being said, it's also something that is apparently could be potentially dangerous if they use a volatile solvent, which is allowed under state law. So there are volatile solvents they can use which can explode if they do it wrong.
Well, I
And
thought-
it has. There was a case up in Santa Fe
I
years
thought,
ago where that.
I thought in our ordinance, it clearly state that we would not allow that. I thought I read that. That we're not
Yeah,
gonna allow propane
I
or
think-
whatever you call in it. I think it was in there, it was in the ordinance, I thought.
I think I recall reading that as well. Looking
So
at
we
here.
pretty much cover that, because that's very dangerous. Actually, Santa Fe has two, I think they even got one license revoked over it, you know?
And you know what? I
Mhm.
don't see it in here. I wouldn't restrict the use of volatile solvents necessarily because it's allowed under the Cannabis Regulation Act and the CCD regs. But you can certainly say if you're using volatile solvents, you have to be in this zone away from residences or things like that.
No, I did read it on this one that we did now, today.
So if we did allow growing within C1 and C2 commercial zones, other than the operational requirement that we see on section 8D for odor, would there be any additional requirements we would need them to operate on in commercial zones?
Nothing under the Cannabis Regulation Act. So that's something that you all can think about what you'd like to include, but there's nothing in the act itself that says they have to do this or they have to do that.
And to be honest with you, I think this might not be on 6AB. I think residential, is it A1 or B1?
A1's agriculture.
A1's agriculture.
Agriculture, this is where I'm trying to get this straightened out. Agriculture is A1, but the fields that I'm talking about is they're classified under the city ordinance as B1 for development if they choose to.
We don't
Okay.
have a
One or
B1.
R1?
It's probably R3.
I mean, R3, I think,
R3.
if you look at the map, okay? And so A1 is agriculture. And what we're talking about is because of the ordinance, and this is something we have to understand, that all this plotting and all these things that happened, they happened before 1982, before the state of New Mexico had the requirement that if you're gonna develop any land, you have to do all the infrastructure, including curb and gutter. So most of these, like these farmers who plow right now would like to keep it as that for in case they decide to develop it, they don't have to deal with the 1982 Act where if you're gonna do a development, you have to do what we call all the infrastructure. That came out of the state legislature. So you see, that's why we don't wanna change, I don't wanna see the changing on the zoning. And this thing is not zoned, most of those properties are not zone A1, they're zone B,
R3.
R3, yeah, R3 for residential. Because that's exactly how they plotted them when they did the plotting for the city of Tucumcari back in the 20s and the 40s. To see if you look at that.
So you want that property to retain its agricultural status as it is, but also retain their right to redevelop.
Redevelop, and because if not, we're gonna wind up with the same mess that other communities do as they grow. All of a sudden, the new law says all infrastructure has to be in place in any development of cultivation, of land, you deny it. But if you take the status out of it, R3, then they're not able to be grandfathered in, and they're already plotted as a 50 by 150 acre lot, you see?
If it's zoned as R3, that means and then it was utilized, it was non-conforming and utilized for ag, that's fine, but once you stop utilizing it for agricultural purposes, then it would revert to R3, which means you couldn't grow.
But these farmers do, when
That's
when you don't have water in the agriculture, you cannot, when you don't have water in your trailer, you cannot grow anything, all you do is graze your cattle.
That's only if they've actually put residentials on there and then they switch back to
Yeah.
agriculture.
And they're not, they're
But,
just.
so they can grandfather in for a while. Do I have to come up here?
Yes, it's,
So as long as
and it's
they're,
not turned on, Vicky.
I turned it
I
on.
don't know.
Don't turn on.
turns itself off.
The batteries are low.
Maybe so.
Okay.
It's on.
This one? Okay.
Yes.
So, after speaking to attorneys, as long as it stays agricultural and
It's
nothing
being
changes,
agriculture.
Yeah. Unless they actually put residents on it and take the residents off and try to go back to
It
agriculture,
won't work.
then they
No,
can't.
because they're getting grandfathered in as agriculture.
Right.
Not a you're not turning a residential neighborhood.
Right.
Like, for example, right there in on the Rock Island addition, you have a whole block across from your lot
Yeah.
that used to be residential, and they knocked all the houses because they're old. You can't turn that into agriculture because it's never been in
Yeah.
agriculture.
So it's known as legal non-conforming.
No, it's not. It's because some of it is, like, for example, we have water rights and some, not we, but the person that has that, he has rights on March Hurley for that property. That is R3 residential. Not only him, but other ones do, you know? Because from Allen Lane west is the city limits, you know? And it's always been agriculture, you know, but it's still zoned as R3 residential. And that's what I want to make sure we cover here.
Yeah, that's
Because
That's
that's
on
all
the- that's
residential,
already on the
all
1052.
agriculture.
already there. That's already,
It says A1.
well, it doesn't have to be in there. It's already in the state laws and in our ordinance that it can be grandfathered in.
In our ordinance, it says grandfathered in, but it only says A1, which is land that was certified as
Any
agriculture
property,
and not
yeah,
residential.
any property that is zoned one thing and has been used traditionally as something else, it's legal, non-conforming until somebody changes it.
But it can also be challenged. Wouldn't it be better if we just put R3, oh, whatever it is?
It's already in there. It's in the 1052. It covers it.
So I'm gonna play devil's advocate, Jared. So here's the other thing. We've been mostly talking about the north side of Tucumcari. What if we have these same zones in residential areas right within Tucumcari? How does that pose an issue where we're gonna have people growing right next to residents?
Well, actually, there's no residents in those areas.
My only concern there would be the potential for a lawsuit from a resident who says, you know, now there's a nuisance. I'm sitting in my backyard and I have to smell cannabis from this business right next to me, and it's affecting my health and my happiness and things like that. So that's a policy decision for you all to think about. I'm just here to try and interpret the law, but I could potentially see a nuisance lawsuit that could be filed by someone who doesn't partake in the industry in that type of situation.
And actually, if you look at it, not only in the north side, we're looking at the end of Rock Island. As you go south, there's a lot of agricultural land in that area too. So we're not only talking on the north side. And actually, most of these residential areas that we're talking about are divided. Some of it is divided by the railroad tracks. The other one is divided, our subdivision that were never developed. So actually, the neighborhood is very limited in that area as far as residents. Anybody moving in new would know that this is already in existing. Does that make sense? If you look at it.
Well, that ag land you're speaking of south of Rock Island, that's in the county, it's not in city limits.
No, it's city. I know, because
My district ends on Rock Island.
yeah, but the District 1 that goes all the way to Allen Lane, what do you call Maple, all the way to Allen Lane, and then down, and it comes all the way up Magnolia, and then it goes all the way to 104, and then back, and that's all agriculture area.
On the northern side, I agree.
Yeah. But the railroad track, you owns a property all along the Maple Avenue.
Yeah, but heading south where the old school is, the agricultural land back.
Oh, no, that's a different one. Yeah. Except for Vivian and then where Katie Gutierrez lives, that's still city limits. You see where Katie Gutierrez and them on 4th Street, that goes way out there to this, is still city limits, and that's all agriculture area. See, so that, you're looking at a lot of real estate that people can come in and buy and develop greenhouses or whatever. I'm sure people are not gonna go out and grow on the outside because they might not have it planned the following day, especially when you're,
60 miles per hour winds.
yeah. So
Jared,
that's
I have a question right quick. We do have section of town that is, zoned as C2.
Yeah.
And it's mostly residential. How would you handle cannabis in that particular instance?
But there's no agriculture there, is there?
No, I'm just talking businesses in general, like a retail
Like a
store
retail establishment.
Is that along First Street?
on Main Street.
Main Street.
So,
There's on First Street too.
Okay, let the attorney answer.
so if there's nothing in the Cannabis Regulation Act or the CCD rules and regulations that would prohibit cannabis or a cannabis company from operating within a residential zone. That's really more of a policy decision, that time, place, and manner restrictions that you have the power to go. It's really just that time, place, and manner restriction as you see fit.
It's actually zoned as C2, which is commercial.
Right.
One
So,
side is C2,
If
the
it's
other side is
commercial
I.
and you allow can operate within commercial, then they can operate there as well.
Okay.
Are you talking about over here by the,
No, kind of, by the house that burned down on Rock Island?
Yeah.
Across the street from there. That whole section of it, that's all C2,
oh yeah, that's commercial, Pitchfork.
Main Street.
Main Street. Yeah. That's all C2.
Well, they have to go through a hearing. But, okay, the clarification on that, should we put R or not, and not only A1? Hello? I think,
Oh, you're asking,
yeah,
that's more of a policy decision. I can't really make that choice for you. Again, are you allowed to operate a cannabis business in a residential zone under the state law? Sure. Do you, as the city, have the ability to restrict the time, place, and manner of cannabis use within your city? Yeah, so if you choose to say no, you have that right.
but we
If you
already,
choose to say yes, you also have that right.
yeah, but we already made the decision that we're restricting it only to undeveloped areas that has been agriculturally used. And A1 is agriculture, and the ones we're talking about, because of the way the subdivisions were made back in the 20s and 30s, are R3, which is residential. You see what I'm saying?
R3 is mobile homes.
Mobile home as well, and, well, there's,
So if we grandfather in R3, it's gonna be any mobile home.
okay. So then actually,
It's good the way it is.
but they're not really zoned. If you look at the city planning and zoning map, it does not say A1.
But that's okay because it's been used as agriculture for a length of time. It hasn't gone to residential.
So the way it reads, and I agree with Vicky, is it's saying typically the growing is gonna just be allowed in A1 with the exception of these other places that are grandfathered in.
Yes.
Sorry.
Which, I mean, that addition is something that we can look at. I'm sure that we're gonna have another conversation on this, right? So adding that R3 just gives some time to gather some more information on where, so we can look at the maps and see where everyone's at. Can we do that? That way we can, I think we have a few more pages to go through as well.
No, because actually, to be honest with you, it says it has to be grandfathered. You have to have used it before in order for you to get grandfathered in. It doesn't matter if you are R3, but if it was not used as an agriculture, it cannot be utilized for growing at all. It has to have been utilized as agriculture. And that's what these people are doing. How for Petty Gutierrez and them live, oh, she did, but I mean, all that area they still using it for agriculture. Only when they don't have water do they use it for, they don't grow, you know
And
what
that
I'm saying?
was my other question. How do we prove who's gonna go and prove, hey, they did use it for ag use, or no, they haven't? I mean, how do we?
God, if you don't know by now, that ground has been tilted every year, is being consistent. And some of them have water rights from our Shirley, some of them have irrigation pumps, So all that is a clear indication, it's all and there's no buildings, never been buildings there. Because of the fact you don't even know it's a subdivision unless you really see the city map.
Well, I know that we had one variance come before our planning and zoning board. They're actually gonna build a home out there, correct, Vicky?
Where Vivian is?
Yes.
Yeah. That's the one, yeah, but it's still agriculture, the Vivian, and she owns it all, she don't have to grow marijuana if she wants to.
Right.
She's the owner of that What is it, about 60, 40 acres
Yeah, something like that.
plot? Yeah.
That's why I want to add the R4 because it's residential and
And agriculture?
agriculture.
It's because it would cover itself under grandfather, that it's being utilized as that.
Mhm.
So does the commission want to put R4? Is that what you're saying?
No, we don't have an R4. I want to create one.
Oh,
We used to have one, it went away somehow, and I think it needs to come back.
okay. Well, no, the only reason is hopefully we're trying to be as friendly as we can for this industry so we can, so we can benefit from it as much as we can, like any other community does. And we certainly want to see more of it inside the community than outside the city limits, because inside the community, we can get our taxes and other stuff that is more beneficial for the community of Tucumcari. Outside, it's a different story.
And I agree with you, Commissioner. I think that's a conversation we can continue to have on another day.
But we want to get this ordinance as soon as possible to get out in the public and get it published. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, at this point, we have another commissioner that's out that hasn't even taken a look at this as well, so. It's gonna take a little bit more time than just this one meeting. So
Well, we're gonna have
I
a
agree.
commissioner of
I agree.
industry after this meeting. So can't win for losing. Okay, go ahead.
I'd love to hear more information on it too, Commissioner. I just think we can go on a little bit.
Okay. And on B6B, you left the church out, which I know the state doesn't require for us to have churches in there, right?
Right.
So,
Some people have tried to insert churches. I completely understand the intent behind that, but I think that would be expanding what's currently prohibited in state law. So I do think there could be a lawsuit in that instance under, the Civil Rights Act or the Equal Protection Clause or a variety of other causes of action.
okay, we'll leave it out. I don't know about the commission.
Okay, next section.
So next section, I didn't really have anything to add. Section 8, letter A there, I did have a comment that I just wanted you all to think about. So the way it was drafted, it says cannabis establishments must operate within a fully enclosed and stationary building or structure. My thought there is some people will want to have an outdoor grow. So would this include an outdoor grow? Would this include a greenhouse that might not be fully enclosed? Would this include something like a shipping container that might not be stationary? Things like that, just for you all to think about.
Currently, what's the state's regulations for medicinal outdoor grow? Don't they have to have security for it?
They have all the requirements. And
There's some very strict requirements
Yeah.
regarding security, indoor or outdoor. So they've taken that into consideration. Can you have an outdoor grow? Yes. So my only concern here would be the fully enclosed and stationary building, because you might have a producer that says, well, I want to operate, I got my license from the state, but I'm just planning on growing on this plot of land like this other guy's allowed to do. Why can't I do it?
But even the one that, like the ones we got grandfathered in that we're allowed to do it, they still have to go to the state and show the state that they can provide the proper security and everything else concerned with it. So it's not that they're gonna be treated different. That's something that we can't even sit there and just say, well, you can do it without it, but this guy's got to. So it's gonna be kind of covered under that anyway, wouldn't it?
Well, so my main concern there would be someone who says, I can't afford to buy a fully enclosed building or have it stationary in a permanent structure. I can only afford to have this plot of land, which I bought. The state looked at it, they saw my security plan, they approved it, they gave me my license, but now the city's preventing me from using that license. My concern would be, under this new Civil Rights Act, and I don't know if you're all are familiar with it, but it opens up the doors to lawsuits typically for really everything and any reason you could potentially think of. So I'm primarily a defense attorney, so I just try and think defensively. And that would be my main concern there.
well, actually, what the state does say is, as long as it's security, and that means like even the chain link fence with all the cameras and all the wiring on it, like they do, I think, in up and down the Rio Grande, you can see the
They're
product.
considered fully enclosed.
Yeah, I mean, they're enclosed, but you can see the product of the chain link fence. And this, I guess, this is what he's referring to. That, does that have to be, a fence that will cover the little lot?
Oh, but the state decides
And
that.
you can require a security screen, so something that they can put up a cheap chain link fence, put, some fake leaves on it and prevent the public from seeing it. They still have to comply with all the security requirements,
By the
that
state.
the state requires. But that way, you could allow an outdoor grow without effectively prohibiting one.
Okay, so what's the question on this one? Since we already established may not display, is that the question, the problem you have with that word display? Product?
No, my concern is the fully enclosed and stationary building or structure.
Kind of, in
Because
other words.
it doesn't have a building, and instead they just have a plot of dirt, and they wanna grow some cannabis, and they've complied with all the security requirements, and they've gotten their license from the state. This ordinance would require them to have a fully enclosed and stationary building or structure, so
Okay,
if that,
Even though the
then you
fence on
can't.
the screen could be considered fully enclosed, it could be misinterpreted.
yeah, that's what we thought,
Yeah, I see what he's saying now.
So Jared, I think the intent of that section was more for retail establishments, not so much producers. It was to eliminate, we have the Route 66 overlay zone, and we have the Main Street District, and I think the intent was to try to keep some of those shipping containers out of there, something that was temporary and was an eyesore. So I think that was the overall intent of 8A.
I would just add the word retail then between cannabis and establishment. So cannabis retail establishments must operate within a fully enclosed and stationary building or structure.
okay, that sounds good.
You can clarify that for any producer who might say, well, I have a greenhouse or I have a plot of land.
Okay.
Alright.
And then I deleted what was subsection C. I think you all discussed that in the beginning of this meeting today, just there shall be no processing, curing, drying, selling, storage, or other display of cannabis or cannabis products at a cannabis establishment. Did you all talk about that, or am I thinking of something
Yeah, we're
else?
not sure how that got there.
That one would.
I didn't
I'm not
understand
sure
it.
how that got at the wording or what,
Yeah.
there's a miscommunication. somewhere.
Yeah, and I go like, how did that get in there? Why even bother making the ordinance?
Right.
I could be wrong, but I want to say the assumption was maybe the same thing, it was for a retail establishment that you couldn't do the curing, the drying, the sell. Well, I guess the selling would be omitted, but everything else was more typically suited for an A1 zone. Maybe that was the intent, but it was just
I
Too
like
many
the
wrongs.
striking it all together.
Yeah.
Yeah, just leave it alone.
I agree.
Why mess with something we don't want to deal with?
Very good catch, though.
I have a question
Yeah.
on the neon lighting. So the word shall, does that make the neon lighting optional?
For-
It's
number is
on
it?
7C.
I just deleted the word should and replaced shall. Shall, for ordinances, I prefer language that's more commanding and says you have to do this or you don't. Because the word should typically can be interpreted, maybe
Right.
somebody says, well, we said you should have one. And maybe one of the businesses will then say, well, you don't say I have to, so I'm not going to. Just to try and avoid any future issues, I put shall.
Like Andy Griffith says, you gotta have all the heretofores and the shalls.
The shell and the
And so with that, can we start thinking about the idea, maybe, I know Scott has used a neon alternative that was a little bit less costly than actual neon itself and is easier to maintain, because here it just says it has to be neon lighting.
So that's taken directly out of our Route 66 overlay zone, in
Oh,
Title 17. And again, it was highly encouraged. It was never required. And I think that's what happened. The verbiage that was off a little bit was because that's how the actual ordinance was adopted. That's part of 1052, correct, Vicki?
Yes. So, yes. So I think we could change that because, the idea is for it to look like neon
Yeah.
Be authentic, as authentic as you can get it, but it doesn't have to be neon, because that's almost impossible to get these days.
Neon is really hard to come by.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good suggestion for us there, is allowing that neon alternative, because I mean, if you look at the shield on the Chamber of Commerce building, you can't tell it's not actual neon.
It looks great, and then I don't know if we go that far into the weeds and talking about using that type, because there's some cheap stuff that, I mean, I know other people around little areas, just party lights in their backyard, that it's pretty cheesy and it's not the same effect if it's just an LED rope light. It's not quite the same as that imitation neon, which I think looks great.
Well, we can get that,
You're just trying to get them to go back with what was there. I think the word neon can be applied to different things,
Yeah. but we can say it
Neon
needs to look like
resembling
authentic
or,
neon.
And that's what I would say, if we expand on language and say neon or some kind of alternative that is most realistic to neon. It can be LED, but it has to be a good quality.
It does state though, where feasible and architecturally sensible,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there, so actually it's not bad, that kind of covers that, because there are some places that might not work on it, or it's gonna be too expensive to do.
And there's places that are not on the boulevard.
Just trying to save some ink.
Gotta put some lights back down there.
The section 9 there, just a thought in subsection A. I don't know how this is gonna work. I've never been to a cannabis consumption area. Not sure how they're gonna operate, and it's not necessarily defined in state law, but what you have there, the designated cannabis consumption area shall be located in an area that employees are not required to enter as a condition of their employment. When I read that, my only thought was, just from a practical matter, will these types of businesses hire a server, or will it just be an area where you get your cannabis and then you go out there by yourself and then you use it, or something like that? So I'm not sure. Maybe there will be a janitor, maybe there will be a general maintenance worker, someone who has a condition of their employment, they have to go into that area. So something for you all to think about, just from a policy perspective, not necessarily a legal matter there. It's not against the Cannabis Regulation Act or anything like that, but I'm just trying to think of what this industry might look like, what these consumption areas might even entail, and just try and prevent problems that could happen down the road.
Has the state given the go-ahead on consumption areas?
They did.
They did?
They are in the process. I attended one CCD meeting where they were talking about it. I'm not sure if they finalized those rules, but the licensing process has to be up and running by January 1st. I don't think it is yet.
No. Actually, if we eliminate, like, put there not required, any of the state requires that they're then it has to be enforced. But if we take it out, then that will solve that issue, wouldn't it? Like you have it there?
Right, yeah, I think you can strike that entire sentence if you want to avoid that concern.
Okay.
And then if that was a problem down the road, you can certainly come up with an ordinance to protect those workers at that time. I think the state will protect workers who are in the cannabis industry as well, just because I perceive it to be an issue down the road.
So actually, you're saying, do away with A, the designated cannabis consumption area? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would suggest that, just to kind of clarify or
Omit it.
clear up that potential confusion for workers who, similar to a maintenance worker, a janitor, a server, things like that. Those people might have to enter a cannabis consumption area as part of their job duties. So if you're saying nobody can do that, then how would these businesses operate?
Right.
While in use.
But again, I don't know how these work, and maybe they don't have those types of employees at these businesses. I don't know.
So you're saying just a minute, so.
This is actually in the sample ordinance that the state put out.
Okay.
Well, let the state deal with it.
Yeah.
That's not, I'm getting involved in that definition.
I would, if it were me, I would probably delete that one, just because I don't know what this industry will actually need in terms of employees. And then I added B, that was just taken from the Cannabis Regulation Act.
What? Okay. Next one is section 10A.
Section 10, good job for having that in there. Believe it or not, there are some municipalities send me a draft ordinance and I'm like, well, where's the penalty provision?
Oh,
And there is none. Well, what's the point? But I think it's good in there. I just changed the word marijuana to cannabis just to stay consistent. Apparently that's the terminology that's used these days. And then I added that little part at the end so that the rules adopted by the Cannabis Control Division as well. Because they're adopting rules all the time and it changes, somewhat, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, but again, this is an industry that's really constantly evolving. So I just wanted to keep that part a little broad so that you're covered.
okay.
And really, that's it. I thought you all did a good job drafting this ordinance and, if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, it was great working with you.
I do have a few questions, and our city clerk has a question as well, Jared, if you don't mind. So the first one I have is in regards to signage. Has the state come down with rules and regs as far as not allowing advertising on billboards? What's the word count on that as far as signage?
They haven't specifically addressed billboards. I know the CCD has addressed signage, and I don't have it memorized. There's so many rules and regs now, but I do know that you can't restrict signage to say you can't have a cannabis sign or your business can't advertise. I think they're entitled to at least one sign. You can restrict the size. You can restrict, I think it has to be no smaller than a 12 by 12 with 1 inch type or something. It was a very specific, obscure regulation. I can look into that for you though.
Just curious, because we do have some ordinances in regards. I know we can't dictate the content of the sign, but my biggest concern was off-premise kind of signage, whether it's billboards throughout city limits or even on the interstate, just at a state level, if that's been discussed yet.
And that's a great question. I don't think they've discussed that. If you've driven to Colorado, especially along the border, I go fly fishing up there every year, and you see billboards with marijuana businesses. And so if they can do it, I imagine our state legislature will allow it, but I don't think it's specifically addressed.
Thank you. And I believe Angelica had a question.
Thank you. So my question is, we have probably about 5, maybe 7 applications that are pending. And in those 5 or 7 applications, I believe, just sitting here thinking about it, I think there may be 3, potentially 1 coming in that are looking at growing in their dispensary.
Okay.
So I need some clarification on that for when they do call in and ask. I've already received an email from one wanting the status of his application. And he's one of the ones that is interested in having a dispensary in the front and grow in the back in a commercial area. So commercial zone is not an issue. It's just on whether he's going to be allowed to have his dispensary in the front and his grow in the back
Great.
in the same building.
I think that's up to.
So they do have something called an integrated license at the state level, where if the state grants it, then he'll have the right to operate both a grow or a producer business and a retail business. So under the law that is allowed, they'll have to submit an application to the state and go through all of their vigorous requirements. But if the state ultimately issues that, I'm not aware of anything that would restrict a business in that regard, saying you can't do this in the same premises. I'd have to confirm that. Again, this is a pretty broad area of law, and there's a lot happening right now. So I can certainly confirm and get back to you on that one.
So if that's the case, going back to section 6A, and then subsection A, C1 and C2, commercials are only for retail cannabis establishments. But we have to open up those C1 and C2s for growing as well then?
That was my concern as well.
Yeah, that might be something that you have to do. Let me flip back and see where we are. You said section 6A.
Yes.
So C1 and C2 would be the retail establishments, but if they're also operating a producer,
George.
right? Just because they can have a dual license doesn't mean that you have to allow them to operate both of those licenses within the same zone. You know, you can keep it as is and say, we have our reasons for wanting cannabis producers in an agricultural zone. And that's where we have agriculture. So just because they are granted a integrated cannabis license doesn't mean that they necessarily have the right to operate a grow and a shop in the same premises in the same zone.
So you're saying actually, if we leave it like that, they're not allowed, is that correct?
Yeah, as it's currently drafted, under section 6AB, so A1 zones are where you would have a cannabis producer. You wouldn't have a cannabis producer in a commercial zone.
Yeah, and I think we talked about industrial area, didn't we, at one time? That would be allowed, but I didn't see any of the I in here, in the growth. I thought we said that growing could be, if it was enclosed in an I industrial, in the industrial area.
I think we included the processing and cultivation as well, didn't we?
Yeah, but I don't see a single I industrial area. And a lot of on Railroad Avenue, you have a lot of real estate that's I industrial. And that's something that, I don't know what the commission wants to do about. Because we did discuss I industrial and I has never been brought in.
I thought we had discussed it.
Yeah, we
I
did.
thought we'd all agreed upon it too.
Yeah, because we did, and it was left out completely on this ordinance.
It just talks about the existing industrial being grandfathered in, they didn't address. That's 6A subsection B.
6A, subsection B. Existing industrial, residential, and residential land for agriculture purpose. Be grandfathered. Existing industrial.
There's some on both sides.
Yeah, because you have a lot of the industrial area that has a lot of wells, that if they want to do a enclosed building, they have the water. And that's one of the requirements by the state in your application. Where are you going to get your water from?
Jared, that's an interesting subject when it comes to talking about water. So with that being said, I know through the application process, you're supposed to show you have water rights or some kind of water to the municipality. Are we obligated, or what's the best recommendation for municipalities having to provide some kind of letter saying that, yes, we can provide water to these individuals that are producing?
Yeah, I think a letter has been sufficient from what I've heard from speaking to RLD. You just have to show a valid legal right to the water. So they didn't really say, here's what you need. Some people go to the Office of State Engineers and get something like the Declaration of Water Rights. Others have just been going to the city and saying, can you draft a letter for me on my behalf that I can submit with my application?
Is there any liability there? I'm assuming there's always some type of liability. Say we have growers on a certain side of town and they're in the middle of watering their crop and we have a huge water leak and we're down for an extended period of time, and now they try to say that, hey, our crop was ruined because you had a water leak on your city water utilities.
Right. I'm sure they'll find a way in that type of situation to file a lawsuit. They could file some type of negligence action. Just if that was something that the city should be maintaining and the city neglects to do so. I wouldn't worry too much about that type of thing right now, because that could happen for any type of business.
True, and I did have another comment. So we also sell water to a few co-ops around Tucumcari. Would we still, since we own the water rights, would they defer any customers that may be going out in the county to the city, and we'd have to write that letter that we're providing the water?
No, I think they should go to the county and situation,
Good.
wherever they are, where they're intending to operate.
Okay, so on this one, it says, okay, the existing industrial and residential, okay, so that would include the industrial area can do growing, is that correct? Agriculture purposes, because some of them have a lot of water, wells, because that's how they had it in the old days.
As long as it's currently being used for.
Mhm.
For industrial?
For agriculture.
Oh, for the agriculture part, but the industrial part.
If those industrial and residential areas are already currently being used for agricultural, then they'll be.
No, I understand the agriculture, I'm talking about the industrial part. Just as long as it's zone industrial, they can do it. Like, let's say, for example, where the old, electric plant was, it's about 3 or 4 wells there. Somebody would buy that as still zone industrial, can they grow? Yeah,
As long
that's
as
what I'm talking about.
It's still existing.
As an industrial zone.
Being used.
Only if it was being used for
Yeah.
agricultural.
So in that scenario.
No, wait a minute. That's not what we
That's what
talked about here in this commission.
That's what it says, though.
It says right here, it says existing industrial, existing. But that wasn't what we were intending. What we said was, as long as it was zone industrial, that can be utilized for indoor growing like greenhouse or whatever.
Yeah, for the scenario you just gave, then no, it would not be included. But if the old power plant was being used for agricultural before, then yes, it could be.
I understand that part. Okay, so that was the intent of the commission when we did say it, was that we wanted industrial areas, because industrial areas are all practically along the railroad track, except for the broom corn factory, which is industrial, if you look at that map. And what we were saying is that if people wanted to come in and do let's say, the greenhousing, the railroad is at one side and the 54 on the other, and there's no residential on that strip of industrial.
Maybe that should be reworded just a little bit, leave the existing industrial, but the and residential zone. I see what Vicky's saying. It does make it seem like that, existing industrial area had to be used for agricultural purposes.
No, yeah,
That's not what
okay.
it's saying in here.
Yeah, it does say
I
that,
think
and that's what I was
We've
questioning.
gotta, somehow put the existing industrial area works, but that and residential zones, the and part may have to come out and put a period there instead.
Existing industrial, okay,
So I do have a comment based on, again, Title 17 with our permitted uses underneath I-1 regular industrial, then we have, I believe it is I-2 heavy industrial. Things like this are not currently permitted, and it talks about anything that would cause access to smoke, noise, glare, odor, or similar qualities. If they didn't have something on it to eliminate the odor of the grow, then right now industrial does not allow for, other than, like you said, it goes grandfathered in because it was used as agricultural.
yeah, and I don't think that was the intent of the commission. The commission was saying, we have this zoning area that is pretty much already, to be honest, it's non-existing.
We
but
did
it's still-
discuss about, though, they have to have some type of filter.
Yeah, we did talk
They have
about
to
the
have-
filter and everything that should be in there.
Basically, we mirrored that, but they have to still show that they're not gonna, create anything that's gonna be, obstructing the residents with foul odors or.
Like, so that's up to the commission, but I believe then that would conflict with Title 17, with the permitted uses in industrial zones.
What do you mean?
So you're saying not to allow growing in industrial zones?
I'm saying that's what our current ordinance states, not word for word, but some of those things would not.
Allow growing?
Yeah.
Well, we can modify that. That's not a problem. The problem is what the intention of this commission was, as I understood it, was that industrial was gonna be allowed to have greenhouses because of the access to water wells that are all along the road.
And as long as they had the filters.
And everything else, and we did talk about that
Keep the
in
odors
here.
out, and security and all that other stuff.
And then that conflicts with what the city was trying to do with not allowing private wells for industrial use.
These are not private wells, these are existing wells.
But they're not city-owned wells.
Yes.
No, but they actually already grandfathered in because they were utilized as water. The electric plant has 3 wells there that they used to utilize. So they have that water right for those acreage that they utilize in there. And then you got, further down, you have some more wells along. But if they come over and ask us for a permit, those that don't have wells, that has permit for water, I mean, from the city, it's up to the city to give them a letter or not.
So do those wells transfer from owner to owner? I mean,
Yeah, water rights, especially if you have a history.
They stay with the property or do they stay with the owner?
They stay with the land unless you specifically take it out on the deed, on the pipe title or title. But to be honest with you, I think if we said industrial, we should include industrial. And we said filters, and we did say, as long as they had the requirement to keep the odor from the residents. And somebody said, I think Connie or somebody said that you can even smell it if you had the proper filters. And I heard, yeah, and that's what the commission said that time. That's why I'm bringing it up. So how can we work that on the industrial area? Hello? Oh, he went to sleep.
What is the question?
The question is that we're debating when this commission met and we discussed on this on Whitby meeting for a long time. We said that in the industrial area, we would allow growth. That means greenhouses or whatever, okay? Because we have an area of our community that is considered to be industrial with residential very limited in many ways, you know? And so that's
Right.
what we were talking about. And because this ordinance says that it has to be grandfathered in, it takes out the industrial part. Because all our industrial land is not being utilized at this point.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you can certainly include industrial. As for the concern with the smell, I'm aware of carbon filtration technology and odor mitigation systems that these companies are required to use, but from what I've been told, at least, it certainly does not eliminate all of the odor. So you'd potentially be subjecting either the company or the landowner to a nuisance lawsuit. I think landowners probably have a vested interest in wanting to be able to expand and lease out their property to cannabis companies because they'll make a lot of money, but they would also still be on the hook for those types of lawsuits.
I understand that part, but the whole deal, most of our industrial area is not very much in the residential area. I mean, one side of our industrial area is the railroad tracks, you know?
Right.
Maybe they like
Yeah, I
to
mean,
smell
you're
when they're going
right
out
to
of there.
regulate the time, place, and manner. So if you want to include industrial, you have that right.
We should, and then let it hit where it hits.
Okay. so
Because that's what the commission talked on this, that Commissioner Duplantis lead the group with.
So I'm gonna kind of go off of what Commissioner Moya said, in that he said that we don't want people to come into town, buy property, and them not be able to use it because of the ordinance.
Right.
I can think of 2 companies right now that have already submitted their application, that they are looking at probably spending, one for sure, about $2 million on their facility. And they're wanting to grow, and they're also wanting to have their store.
That's right.
So
At the same location.
in the same location, correct. So that's a concern for me. If he calls me and asks me, because of this ordinance, now I can't have I can't have my dispensary and my grow in the back, and here I've spent $2 million on my building and my business, what do I tell him?
Well, because we didn't complete the ordinance, and he's not grandfathered in because he did not start it, you know what I mean?
I know, but here we're trying to talk about being friendly.
Yeah, we're being friendly, all right, but the whole deal is he should have checked before he started, and that's what we're looking at right now. We're trying to make what's in the best interest of the community. And what I'm saying is, if we can get all these put together, then they can come in and I mean, he can modify it or maybe come for a variance, but what we're trying to do is make it more of a standard so that we cannot, you know, deviate too far from the ordinance.
Is that an allowable variance, Jared, based on trying to change allowances versus setbacks or something that's a hardship when it comes to actually property?
Well, right now, nobody has a license.
You know, as an attorney, I certainly wouldn't want to represent someone seeking a variance to that degree if it's contrary to the ordinance. If that's the intent of you all, then maybe you should just include it in the ordinance itself rather than,
That's right.
allow. I think it would be better just to clarify things in this ordinance, one way or another. I have no say or concern, but it's usually best to clarify things in an ordinance as opposed to leaving it open for future interpretations.
And that's where I'm at. I think I would like to have that conversation of opening up commercial for growth as well. That way it encompasses it all.
But you're looking at the whole boulevard area,
Well,
oh, the downtown area, and I don't know.
and a lot of the problem a lot of the concerns I've had has been smell. So in hearing Connie's testimony of she stood right next to the building and smell can be mitigated. I think I'd be comfortable looking at it again. And hearing that the smells and everything else that comes with it can be mitigated and it can be made to where you can't even walk by a building and know what it's doing.
Yeah, but the whole deal is we don't have any liability because the state has not issued a license yet.
Yeah.
It only if the state had issued a license and they already had their establishment going.
So when the state does go, issue the license and they get that integrated license where they can have a grow in the same building, I think.
But if our ordinance,
Should we have it in our license, in our ordinance that we can allow that at that point? I think what.
yeah, that's fine, it has to be.
We should put that if they do come up with an integrated license, I don't see no reason, because once again, the state supersedes us, that, I don't see no reason why we, as long as they go by the regs and everything else, the smells and all that stuff, why we couldn't go ahead and allow it. But of course, that's a bridge. I agree, maybe it should be a little more clear if they do come up with the integrated license, then they're going through that process.
Yeah, but when it comes to an integrated license, it's up to the city ordinance to decide if they're gonna allow it to be an integrated license.
So, and that's where I
that's-
understand, and
well,
that's
They'll
where I'm
still
concerned.
get their integrated license from the state, and even if you don't allow them to operate within the same premises,
Yeah.
they'll be allowed to
To do
operate both a producer business and a retail business. Whether that is on the same premises,
Or
it
not.
doesn't necessarily, they'll just have the license and the capability to do that.
Like me, I could have one at Versa Vista for a dispensary and then have my growers outside, where I have my farm. And it's an integrated license.
So what you're asking, what are you gonna tell this guy?
Exactly.
Yeah,
What am I gonna tell him? What am I gonna tell the
yeah,
hookah lounge owner that intends to do the same thing in her building?
right,
What am I gonna tell this gentleman that's looking at buying property on Mountain Road or has already invested money on Mountain Road?
right.
What am I gonna tell these people that are looking at getting an integrated business license, micro business license, and now we're telling them, oh, per our ordinance, you can't. Now you're gonna have to go get agricultural land to sell or to grow and
Right.
transfer it and sell it in your building. That's my concern.
I
Well,
agree, because we're allowing it in industrial, we're allowing it in everything else, but we're saying, no, but you can't do it commercial. That's my concern. I don't see the issue of doing it with, you have the proper ventilation, I think it's fine in both, because I think we do have more applicants and people that
Mhm.
approach us with that. Can I do it both in C1?
Well, if you look at a lot of the buildings that, are being looked at, they're actually too big to be just a dispensary.
Right.
I think it should be clarified that, with the proper licensing, I think it should be allowed. Just for the fact that, when we started all this, the state wasn't being very clear about what they were gonna allow. But if they're getting ready to allow those kind of licenses, and I'm gonna use, I don't know any building that's up other than, I think Bone Electric's the only one I know for a fact, but, say Napa. Napa's got a basement that's got 3,200 square feet, somebody buys that just for a dispensary, that's a lot of waste of space, that they can utilize that for, and when we wanna be greedy about it, if they're growing it in the same building, that's GRT dollars. It's more for, I hate to say it this way, it's more for us.
No, that'd be ideal, but we're looking at mostly, in general, everybody who would wind up with a commercial.
And even, when, we were discussing about the attorney that came in here, That's what he's wanting to do.
That's what we want to do, but,
You know, so-
the question is next to the higher education area.
But that's.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying though, but with these other buildings, you know, yeah, they can go in and get a variance and bring it up in front of the commission, but it's like what you were bringing up a while ago. Why don't we make it a little more clear so maybe we can avoid those extra steps and those that extra confusion? Because at the end of the day, they're gonna come here, they're gonna go to Hobbs, or they're gonna go to Clovis. They're not gonna benefit us in those other places. If we can make it a little more clear, which.
No, clear is important.
Yeah, if we can
So
make
I
it clear that we're accepting of it, that might benefit us a little bit more.
And by
So
the,
then it's just my opinion that comparing the Powwow West situation
Mhm.
to the gentleman on Mountain Road, we're not comparing apples to apples.
No,
So-
no, I was just using that. I was just.
Sure, and I understand that, but I think we need to clarify that part, in that are we going to allow the integrated micro business license holders to grow in their dispensary shop?
Well, and
That's the only clarification I need.
Right.
There's, like I said, we've already issued one license to the hookah lounge who is looking at doing the same thing.
you said a license already?
The hookah, we did issue the hookah license. So in her plans, she showed that she is looking at growing as well. So what do I tell her? What do I tell, like I said, the gentleman on Mountain Road? I need direction from the commission on what I am to tell him.
if they called tomorrow, I think the simple truth is,
So just keep in mind, I've already received an email from him, wanting the status of his
We're
application.
still working on the ordinance, and it'll be all clarified in the ordinance, and that's what you have to let them know. The ordinance is being drafted and it should be completed, and you will have all the definition.
Well, actually, it's completed, the amendment. The ordinance is.
Yeah, the amendment to the ordinance.
Amendment. But, you know, and I know this, I don't think this is an action item tonight, so really technically my vote won't count. But I think, you know, it should be clarified that if they have the integrated license, my personal belief, I think it should be clear in here that if they have the appropriate license from the state, that it should be allowed,
and I think
in a commercial.
in the present, I think the answer to that email is, it's uncertain because the commission hasn't made that final decision,
That ordinance.
but that we are sympathetic to that plea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
but
whole-
don't take your
hopefully
$2 million
the whole deal
Hopefully
is-
he's able to justify, we can justify the $2 million you spent.
Well, the whole deal is he should have just waited till the ordinance are done, and actually nothing is legal until January the 1st when they start applying for license.
Licenses are out now.
Yeah, they are,
Already
but
issued 3
Mhm.
yesterday.
the state has, I don't think we have a single one yet here.
Well, that was my concern. If we're gonna be business friendly, then let's be business friendly.
Right.
Are we gonna allow it?
No, but we also have to be responsible to our residents, and part of that is making sure that we provide a good living environment in our community for some of those.
In my opinion, there's no difference between that situation and the industrial and houses being right across the street.
Correct.
There is no difference.
As long as they've got the appropriate
Exactly, as long as they have
ventilation,
the appropriate
security.
license.
It should be
And
okay.
that's required, that's gonna be required, or it is required actually in any state.
Yeah, but there is a difference because in the industry, you're not allowed to have dispensary. It's a grower.
And that's the issue in both situations, is the growing, not the dispensary part. I'm not concerned about the dispensary part. I'm more concerned about the response to the growing side of it. That's my concern.
In my personal opinion, I think the growing should be added to C1 and C2, just to put it out there. That's, I'd love to see it drafted, I'd love to see the words polished up, but in short, I think we're more business friendly and we're showing that we're willing to work with those who are willing to invest in our community if we allow that.
I agree.
My humble opinion.
Yeah, because that could be a game changer. The gentleman
Yeah.
willing to invest $2 million, and I say, well, I'll go down the road because they're gonna let me do it somewhere else.
You can quote me on that.
No, and I mean, I would like to see it that way, don't get me wrong, but then I'm also looking at the Route 66 people who want to preserve the area. Let's say we get everybody full in there with all kinds of dispensaries, and no longer now is it Route 66, it's now it's a dispensary 6 states. You know what I mean? Everybody growing, you know what I mean? So it's gonna destroy the Route 66 theme, or whatever you wanna call it, because now it became a growers. That's why we have to have ordinances and stuff like that and see what's in the best interest of that business area. You know?
So I don't know if you intend to do Route 66, reference Route 66 specifically, but from the application.
No, I'm just using that as an example.
So from the applications that I've received,
Mhm.
only 2 are on Route 66.
No, I understand that, but I'm using that as an example. You
Okay.
can come in and no longer do you have a Route 66, now you have a dispensary grower, Route 66. So I don't know, that's up to, I don't know how those business people will feel. If I invested a lot like in the Blue Swallow and other motels, and now all of a sudden I can no longer come, nobody comes down there because it's now a dispensary route,
You mean grower route?
grow around rather than, and the
But
old,
shouldn't our Route 66, and I'm,
Yeah.
just because you're saying recent, but shouldn't the overlay cover that part?
you can make them all look like Route 66, but it's still dispensary.
But, you go downtown,
Dispensaries
the
are
stores
allowed
downtown
in
have the same
C2
problem.
fits.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking dispensary when I'm growing, everybody now turned it into a growers with a little shop at the front.
But
Well, and I guess it'd be my assumption that those who are gonna retail and grow, that's gonna be such a small subset from those who are just gonna retail or those who are just going to grow. So, I understand that. So if all the buildings down on 66 are now consumed by growers rather than actual retail shops, then foot traffic's gonna drop, and we don't want that. But
I mean,
I would assume that subsect is of growers and retailers all in the same building.
if they got the integrated license, that they've got every intention to have the shop.
Yeah.
That's my suggestion. Maybe we could include that language. If you're intending to do both, it can be done in C1. But if you just want to strictly grow, then it needs to be done in these other zones.
I agree with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do too, that's a good one.
You mean if you have the integrated license, you could do C1?
But you've got to do both.
But if you're just gonna grow, then it needs to be
It has
A1
to
or
be,
A2,
yeah.
colored in, or I1.
Well, I think mostly everybody is intending to do both because of the micro growth. Because 200 plants, you can really accommodate within 3,000 square footage.
Okay, we need to wrap this up because we've got a meeting in 8 minutes.
I gotta get
Can I ask you one more question? So in that case, is there a limit on the size? So does it have to be proportionate, the retail has to be proportionate to a certain size of the grow or vice versa? So, I mean, if you can do a retail shop the size of this table and have the remaining building be the grow, is there a restriction on that?
No, nothing in the state regs, or the Cannabis Regulation Act.
But in our ordinance, if they want to eliminate to the micro growers, which is only 200 plants, that can go with C1
It would have a
and
warehouse for 200
not
plants.
have the 10,000 plants that you will be allowed. You see what I'm saying? Then we have to write it into that ordinance and say, you can have the micro growers as well as the dispensary. But you cannot go, if you don't have a if you go beyond the micro growers, which is beyond the 200 plants, then that should not be allowed on the C1. That will eliminate it becoming just a growers area with a little
So then
dispensary.
the language that
But then
Mayor
it's
Pro
not a
Tem
micro anymore.
suggested would be the appropriate language then.
Yes.
It has to be a micro grower and not an open growth. You see, and I think if we limit it to just micro growers, we're looking at 200 plants. Okay.
Was he gonna add anything else to it?
Did you have anything else to speak on that, Jared?
Well, my only concern there is the discrepancy between the micro and the general commercial license. That could potentially subject the city to, again, an equal protection type argument where they say, I grow 202 plants, not 201, like a micro is. Why are you limiting me to this area? I can't really see the justification or the rationale other than we don't want the big guys here. So, and the big guys oftentimes are the ones with the money to file the lawsuits. So that's where I would be concerned. If you're gonna allow it, then allow it for everyone.
Yeah, but the micro grower will come with what we call a dispensary as well. To be allowed in the same building.
You can be an integrated micro business or an integrated larger business with none of the small 201 plant count restrictions. So I would treat them all the same. And one other thing to think about too, in 2025, plant counts go away.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you're a micro, it doesn't matter if you're a larger one. It's all gonna be the same essentially.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Jared. We appreciate you. We appreciate your input.
No problem. Thank you all, and if you have additional questions, I think you have my information, both my telephone number and my email. Always happy to help, and I'm happy to do any additional research you may need.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you, it's
All right.
appreciated.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned for our
Wait.
next one.
You know, well, before we adjourn, I'd like to see this ordinance start drafting it and getting it out of the way. I would like to see this ordinance, we already went over it, we decided the modification that we want. And I think we need to see that, Angelica brought it up, she's trying to give answers, she can't give answers, we don't have the addendum to this ordinance. We already did the modification, there's question marks on 3 or 4 areas that we still have to come up with. We should have a special meeting, finish this thing off, and let it be history. We cannot continue procrastination because we need something solid on the ground.
What is the amendment timeframe?
It's the same as any typical.
Yeah, but we need to, before we can publish it, we have to clarify a lot of question marks that we put in here, that we did not get answers. And I think we should have a special meeting, finish this ordinance. And because we already corrected it, now let's finish it. Let's go ahead so that we can go with the publication on the addendum.
I agree.
And I'd
I
like
am-
to invite Jared again, that way we could discuss about fees. I know we're running short on time, but we don't really talk about
And,
the fees associated with that.
but we need to get this thing going and out of our nerves and let the people decide.
We have 2 ordinances on the books that make it criminal to possess marijuana or the paraphernalia, so would those need to be repealed?
Just take it.
I would like to, if it's okay with you, all the part for the Main Street overlay and all that, I would like to do a separate ordinance as soon as possible to actually correct our 1052, the 17 ordinance.
Yeah.
To include all this that we need in there.
Why not?
Makes it really great.
The sooner we get all this settled, the better off we are. And I think we need to
Main
get-
Street's been wanting the,
Mixed use?
mixed use, why don't we just add that in the table?
Amen.
Okay.
But we need to get this out of the way. Can we set a meeting for another work or whatever we need to, a special meeting or whatever? We need to get this out of the way. People are waiting. Yeah. I'm open, I know next week is Christmas, you know, I'm not moving.
I'm not here.
What did you buy me?
Be surprised. But I think the sooner we better off, I mean, you know, even if we could do it early
You're still
part.
in office, you can handle it.
Do we push for something that soon, or the 3rd through the 7th, when everyone's back from vacation? I know there's a lot of internal city staff that'll be out pretty much till the 1st of January.
Well, this is taking a lot of time from us, from the city operation, and I think we need to just get it before, hopefully before the 1st. I would want this out of here before the 1st. We already know what we want changed. We have questions that we still have to have answers to, or we put all these question marks. We should have another meeting and get it before the 30th of this month, just to be commissioner.
You just wanna
So
see us
is
for New
your
Year's,
goal-
don't you?
Uh-huh.
Is your goal to have the special work session before the 30th?
Yes, and then be able, if we have to, at the beginning, do a regular reading for the amendment and go forward. But everything should be completed and sealed and sent in for publication.
We can't do the work session and post reading, can we, on the same meeting? That reading needs to be.
Sunday,
published.
2 hours.
Does the first reading have to be
Final
published?
reading has to be, so keep in mind that by law, we're not obligated to have a first reading.
No,
However, that's just the precedence, that's what was done before me, so I just continued it. And I would like to continue it in this, with this ordinance specifically. First reading could be, I mean, depending on when the draft is finalized, I mean, I could type it
we
and,
should have it all finalized by the 30th of this month. Let's finish this startup thing that we started in February this year. Let's don't drag it on to next year.
well, it's gonna have to be dragged into next.
No, it's okay for the publication, but I mean, I'm changing lettering, word, and all these question marks we put on all these things that we didn't answer. We need to have a work session, get it out of the way and move on.
So you want it ready for publication from the 1st?
Yeah, that's what I would like to see. I like this thing out
And once it's ready for publication, it does give you some answers.
Yeah.
To provide.
Right.
Cause it shows that it's already, we've agreed on the wording and,
Mhm.
if I can't be here physically, I'll call in.
Well, me
You
too.
know, that's not a
I'm not sure
problem.
when you're gonna set this.
I just want this out. And
And
history,
I'm, well, I invested a lot of time in it
Yes,
as
you
well,
did.
and,
we all did.
would like to see it, and give these answers and have, people start opening things.
Yeah, and I think if we finish the wording and the ordinance by the 30th, then the beginning of next year, we do the publication, and if there's any objection or rejection, we'll work from there. I don't know, but anyway, that's up to you guys. But I feel very comfortable if we could have another work session sometime soon. I mean, to finalize it.
What is the 29th?
A Wednesday.
Yes.
I can be back by then.
Okay.
When are you scheduled to be back?
Well, I was gonna stay a little bit longer, but that's okay. I can be back on the
Well, we
29th.
can do it by Zoom if you want to.
Or I could call in, whatever. Depends on where I am. If I'm on the road or where I am. I don't know.
I'm the rest area.
Yeah,
Can
I'm
you hear me now?
in the middle of Arizona somewhere.
Tell her, hey, Ruth, get away from that sea mines. Make
I'll
it
request my leave days because I was taking off pretty much the next week, but whatever works, I'll.
No, we have to get this out of the way. This has to be history. I would recommend any time would be fine for me. I will make sure that my schedule is open for that. I'll have my girls reschedule whatever I have that day, and I'll be here.
I'll do the same. I don't know if I can be here, but I can.
Yeah,
call in or
but
be here
we
once.
started it, we know what we're doing, and then to keep it dragged on, and here April comes, and we're still trying to make an order.
I'll be honest with you, I'd like to see it completed before I go.
Yeah, and let's get it done. You worked on it hard, and we did too, and, what day would be great? For me, it doesn't matter. Any day would be great.
Well, the mayor's
It's
available.
any, I
for
mean,
part-
anytime the 28th or later, give me time to get home anyway. I'd like to spend
Okay.
the
If we
day
do it the
doing
28th,
Christmas.
let's come in and let's get it done by the end of the work session. And out in history, and then move it on.
I'm good with that,
What day?
the 28th.
28 would be great.
Tuesday.
Okay, no problem. I'll be here. I can rearrange my schedule.
I may be coming in. I may be coming in
No,
my
I
sweats and
just-
t-shirt.
I just hate the thing dragging on and on.
That's our first day back because we'll be off the 27th on
Right.
Tuesday.
So I'll get a public notice out tomorrow.
Okay,
So the 28th, what time?
I'm gonna be here.
4 o'clock?
I start early. Do we want to make this schedule contingent on Jared being available too for any of us?
Yes, I think so. So it
Uh,
may not be the 28th, it would just
You
depend
did the
on when Jared.
28th or the 29th.
Right, but we need to also check with Jared to see
Yeah.
when he's available.
Cause we need to get this out and done.
And so again, the only thing we're having is the work session.
Right.
You guys will do the
Nothing else.
discussion for final questions, and then we'll move forward with publication
The
on the
following.
5th of January.
Okay.
Okay,
And then it has to be published how many days before we could have the public hearing?
14 days.
14.
Yeah, and that will put it in good.
So keep in mind, we still have to have a first reading, so we could have the first reading on January 13th.
So I said we didn't have to have the first reading.
We don't have to, but we've always done it, so I don't want us to get in a situation where we've always done it and now we're not.
So is it 45 days after the first reading?
More or less.
But if you have the ordinance, she knows what
Because
people
it's
know.
14 days to the next reading.
Right,
And then after that, you have to adopt, and then it takes, 15 days to actually be into law?
yes, so if we have, right, if we do it on the 28th, 29th, 30th, in that week, pending Jared's schedule, I could have it published, and when it's published, it's gonna have the second and final reading date.
Good.
So it'll be published on the 5th, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So January 20th, anytime after January 20th, I can have a second reading.
Good.
The first reading would be on the 13th, and the 27th would be the final reading.
But at least we have everything.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's only right that we do that.
We're gonna appoint you to come in as
Ex officio?
then away to sit in, stand in.
We'll get this out of the way.
I'm gonna make the motion. Can I go to the restroom?
Let's all go.
Oh, it's almost like being in school again. Give him the pink slip.
Okay.
Ay, Dios mío santo. Come on, pretty good. We got it all.